Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all again to our 2021-2022 Visiting Speaker Series in the Department of Visual Arts. I'm Associate Professor Pınar Yoldaş, and I've been working with Associate Professor Paul Sepuya, who has been the chair of the Speaker Series Committee, and Assistant Professor Janelle Iglesias to prepare the series for you. The Speaker Series is supported by the Britton Family Foundation. Thank you to everyone who participated in nominating artists for the Speaker Series. I would like to also send my thanks to Nick, Laura, Yulia, and Paolo for their administrative and coordinating work on the series. Today, our speaker is Amy Franceschini. So very quickly, I'd like to do a brief introduction of Amy. She's an artisan designer whose work facilitates encounter, exchange, and tactile forms of inquiry by calling into question the certainties of a given time or place where a work is situated. An overarching theme in her work is a perceived conflict between humans and nature. Her projects reveal the history and currents of contradictions related to this divide by challenging systems of exchange and the tools we use to hunt and gather. Using this as a starting point, she creates relational objects that invoke action and inquiry, not only to imagine, but also to participate in and initiate change in the places we live. In 1995, Amy founded Futurefarmers, an international group of artists, anthropologists, farmers, and architects who work together to propose alternatives to the social, political, and environmental organizations of space. Their design studio serves as a platform to support art projects and artist in residence program and their research interests. Futurefarmers use various media to deconstruct systems to visualize and understand their intrinsic logics. These could be food systems, public transportation, education. Through this disassembly, they find new narratives and reconfigurations that form alternatives to the principles that once dominated these systems. They have created temporary schools, books, bus tours, and large-scale exhibitions internationally. Amy received her BFA from San Francisco State University in photography and her MFA from Stanford University. She has taught in the visual arts graduate programs at California College of Arts in San Francisco and Stanford University, and is currently faculty in the Master of Eco-Social Design at the Free University in Bolzano, Italy. Amy is a 2009 Guggenheim Fellow, a 2019 Rome Prize Fellow, and has received grants from the Cultural Innovation Fund, Herb Alpert Award for Visual Artists, the Creative Work Fund for New Media, and the Graham Foundation. Needless to say, Amy's work with Futurefarmers has influenced generations of artists who work in the eco-activism domain, including myself. So it is my pleasure to have you with us today. Without further ado, Amy, the Zoom stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just get this set up here, share screen. Advanced portion of screen. Let's see if I can. Of course, it worked perfectly in our. Let's stop share. Screen. Let's go advanced. Thank you for bearing with me. There. Okay. Thank you for having me, and for everyone who's there. I don't see you, but I'm imagining like a tiny theater. Everybody's crammed together, breathing freely. I'm Amy Franceschini, and I'm representing body of collaborators called Futurefarmers today. And since it's me, I'll start with a little background of myself. And I like to start with this picture because, as you heard, I did study photography, and I actually went to art school and I started in photojournalism because I was 17 and I was quite pissed off at the world, and I thought, I'm gonna share the truth through the image. I really thought that image making was the way to really share the truth. I was kicked out of photojournalism and told to go to the art department because I was taking really boring photographs. My professor at the time, I was taking pictures of endangered landscapes in the San Joaquin Valley, so kind of wetlands that were becoming suburbia and Costco parking lots. And my professor said that that was really boring. I should go to the art department. And so I went to the art department and was thrown into this. The only class that was open in photography was this field camera class. And we didn't get a camera this big, but we got a 8x10 field camera, and we had to share it with someone. So we had to work in twos. The professor gave us a camera. He gave us $100,000 grant. He had just gotten the document that he wrote. And he said, I want you to write a $100,000 grant for a project you want to do. See you at the end of the semester. His name was Robert Dawson, amazing photographer. And it wasn't probably for 20 years later that I realized how much this class had an impact on me, especially in sharing the camera and the tool of this, field camera that takes a lot of time to set up, and it took two of us actually to do it. And as you'll see in the work I'm going to show today, Futurefarmers is often interested in how do we make tools that take several people to use and kind of either scale up a function of a tool or kind of perturb it or reverse it. So Futurefarmers was something that I started in 1994, really because I couldn't do a studio practice. If I sit in a studio by myself, I talk myself out of everything. And Futurefarmers was a design studio in 1994, and we started a artist in residency program. So this was, what you're seeing here was an attempt to kind of map the people, projects, and places that we've worked in since 1994 in a retrospective we had in San Francisco in 2018. So through the artist in residency program that we started, people came to San Francisco, they worked on their own projects, and then we always tried to work together on a new project that pushed our skills somehow. And this really created an international working group of people that would come together in different places based on interest and often just having time. In that retrospective, we actually asked the museum if we could have some sort of live element to kind of the historical framing of Futurefarmers. And I'm showing this picture because I often feel like we have to be very stubborn in the art world to kind of push through the muck of things that are presented to us quite often in institutional frameworks. So maybe we can talk about that at the end a little bit. But for our retrospective, we had one room that was kind of a classical presentation of our work for 25 years. And then we had another room where it was a productive space that was animated almost every weekend. And in the kind of classical space, we had two students hired for the summer. We had to fight for a salary to be our archivists. And so what they're doing there is looking at 25 years of video on this little handheld camera. One's listening and one is watching. And every 3 minutes, they take a smoking break. There's these kind of ceramic cigarettes. And one of them types what they heard and one types what they saw. And so this went on every day. And this was a way to kind of also archive our video, provide us some jobs for recently graduated students, and have a live element in our show. And also to remind ourselves how stubborn we have to be sometimes. Just a little recent vignette, and I'm going to show you some kind of arc of older work just to show you what we've been up to. This is a drone footage of a residency we just finished at San Jose State University. where we worked with the marching band, the ceramics department, and the printmaking department. And what you're seeing here is, well, actually, let me scroll forward. You're seeing the marching band barefoot wedging California clay, and they are playing a score that we worked with a musician, sound artist named Yossi Pereira to write a score based on data that we were able to get from this Corcoran clay, which is a clay that's being extracted from the San Joaquin Valley right now for drilling wells to get to water because there's a drought and people are having to dig deeper and deeper into the earth, and they've hit this Pleistocene lake called Corcoran Lake. And at the base of that lake is this very beautiful clay called Corcoran clay, which the ceramics department was very excited to work with. And we wanted to get into a process with the ceramicists and the printmakers and with the band. And so this is just a process piece. We made a giant metronome. We gained access to the parking lot, and the band manager helped us choreograph the band to play this score that was not generally what the marching band would play. What you're seeing here was at the end of the piece, we had this giant 100-foot long score that we just kind of let the band get wrapped up into. So this was different extractions of clay, and the students were marching and preparing this clay for us to use in the ceramics department to make a series of sound making instruments that we later used. So these are just some images of those, another top view. So to jump into kind of an arc of projects that I'll show you, I'm going to go back to 2007. This was a moment when we were asked to do a project at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And at this time, I was kind of interested in how do you push out of the museum? To me, the museum seemed like a very limited audience. And I was also questioning the role of art for me, and thinking about how can all of this work we do as artists have something that lives on beyond a show, lives on beyond ourselves. And so a short little vignette in this project was, it was actually an award that I had won at the SF MoMA called the Seika Award. And I wanted to kind of take the historical program of the Victory Gardens and create a new version in 2007. And so I proposed to put a garden in front of City Hall based on this image I found in the library of a little demonstration garden in front of City Hall in 1942. And this man standing there was the director of the Parks and Recreation Department, who said, we need to demonstrate how to garden in front of City Hall. Because during the Victory Garden program, the government, the Civilian Defense Corps and the Department of Agriculture came together and basically tried to enlist all Americans, United States citizens, to become farmers because soldiers were off at war. And during this time, 48% of our food was produced in backyards and parks. And to me, that was just really striking to think about, that there is maybe a viability to growing food in our cities. So parks were open during that time. This is Golden Gate Park. They had 350 plots. And I, at the time, knew someone in the City Hall, because I'm like, how can I convince the city to do this? It seems kind of far away. At the time, we had this wonderful board of supervisors, president of the board of supervisors. This is a picture of him in his suit, Matt Gonzalez. This was his office. And he used to open his office once a month to have art exhibits, and he would give away free food in the hallways. This is an exhibit. I think this was his last show. Barry McGee had an exhibition, and it might seem kind of silly to have this like smash the state inside the City Hall. But for me, this was kind of an epic moment where I had never really been inside of City Hall. And it was just packed on these art opening nights, and Matt really made it feel like this is our home and this is where things should be said. And it was this moment where I was kind of coming from kind of a very strong anti-war activism place, and also this place of smashing the state, where I was like, actually, we can work inside this space. It's our space. So I kind of feel like I became a reformist at this moment. Long story short, Matt Gonzalez helped us negotiate with the city to put a garden in front of City Hall. The mayor at the time was Gavin Newsom, our governor now, taking advantage of this media moment. We partnered with the Slow Food Nation to make this garden happen. So it would never have happened without Slow Food Nation and the whole team of people that were part of this. I think the two things that came out of this that I wouldn't have imagined is that the garden wasn't just a garden. It was actually these plots that were hosted by every gardening group in the city that was funded by city funding. And so what it did is it brought all these people together and actually galvanized a movement and created an urban agricultural alliance, which still exists. So it's sort of this committee that tells the city what the needs of urban ag are. The other thing that came out of this was a set of new policy that I co-wrote with Matt Gonzalez. And basically it was just feeding into a carbon emissions mandate that they already had, and this healthy San Francisco mandate to create the healthiest city by 2050. So within this, we folded in funding for urban farming, which meant mostly paying for administration and paying for free courses to be had in the city. Out of this project, lots of projects came that were sort of inviting future farmers to come to cities and imagine their city as the greenest city in the world. We were invited to Philadelphia to do that. I won't show that project. And then we were invited to rural Italy to imagine, to kind of excite people's imagination to stay in a very rural region where a lot of kind of kids were leaving to go to the city, and there was no desire to stay around and farm. So we were in a place called Abruzzo. We agreed to come, even though it seemed strange for people from San Francisco to go to Italy and excite people's imagination to stay there. But we wandered around for 2 weeks in different villages, and we had a translator. And the thing that kept coming up is people said, this region was wild 2 years ago, among other things. And there were wild horses roaming, but Ryanair put in an airport, and people from England are now coming to build their second homes, and they're building fences, and they don't want wild boars, and they don't want anything wild around their houses. Also, this is at the time we were there, people were speculating for oil. There was also massive landslides. The climate was changing. The economy was down. So everything was sort of like, there was no possible futures at this point. But we latched onto this image of the horse, because every time people would talk about this region, they'd say, just 5 or 10 years ago, there were wild horses. So often we start with a drawing or a scrappy prototype, just like as we're talking. So this was Lotte Franken and Steen Skiffeliers and I were in Italy at the time doing this project. And I think we were eating cereal. We took the cereal box apart and thought, what if we made a human-powered horse? And we moved from village to village and just asked people what their image of the future of farming is. And we just kind of went from there. We tried to build a human-powered horse with just local materials as much as we could. So a lot of the farms are olive farms. So this is a horse head made from the local olive trees. The area is very hilly, so we thought we would just walk this horse for 2 weeks, but we had to borrow a tractor to take the horse to villages and then walk them in the villages, because this area is very hilly. But there was something really beautiful about this tractor pulling this horse and then kind of unveiling it in the villages. So we would just roll up into a village and see what happened. And I think what was exciting about this project was that normally when you work for an institution, if you do something public, you have to kind of prescribe it, imagine who your target audience is, have a map of where you're going, think about outcomes. And our host didn't ask for any of that. He said, let's just see what happens. Let's go. And so we knew we wanted to go to a few villages, but what would happen is we'd kind of roll up. The horse was very loud, and immediately kids would be our first encounter. We painted the interior of the belly of the horse with blackboard paint, and at every village, we would ask people to write their images of the future of farming. And an unexpected thing that happened is one village would write on one side, and then we would go to another village. And because there was sort of like a competition between the villages, they'd be like, oh, Loreto wrote this, we're going to write this. And so it kind of animated the conversation. What also happened here on the right, you see this woman, this woman that was staring at us the whole day. We were in one village, and finally someone said, she's the oldest woman in the village. And then she disappeared, and she came back and brought her brother, who was a blind beekeeper, who wanted to tell us about the collapse of the bee colonies in this region. So people just started telling, we didn't even have to ask questions. People just started telling stories, and we made a documentary of this. And the thing about the horse was, immediately when we would come in, people would say, "Que cosa? La cavala?" Like, why the horse? And in retrospect, what we try to do when we start projects is create something that makes people ask questions immediately, so that there's a space open for discussion, and there's not an answer provided, but there's a space for more questions. And so the horse really did that immediately, because it was a bit absurd. We went to villages, and then villages would tell us where to go to a next village. So everybody said, you have to go to the fancy fair. There's a lot of farmers there. The mayors are there. So this was a kind of fair where a lot of villages would visit. And during this session, a lot of the farmers said, we want to continue this conversation. You can't leave, the horse can't leave. And we're like, we have to leave. Proposals were made to start a conversation on the local radio station. And so our host was very excited about that. And we proposed to make a radio station in a tree house on the farm where we were staying. So because of one of the storms, many of the 350-year-old oak trees had fallen. And so we proposed to use those trees and create this kind of base station for these conversations to continue. And I'm kind of doing a nuts and bolts lecture today, since I'm not there in person. So I'm going to go through kind of more about process. And often, again, we start with drawings. This time we did like a 1-to-1 scale sketch. So we harvested bamboo from the farm and made this kind of sketch of a space. Like, can this thing live in this tree? How do we suspend it? How do we fix it? We invited arborists to come and say, will we harm these trees that are still standing? We invited woodworkers to ask if we could actually mill some of this wood. And then we started building this form that Loda designed, because a lot of the farmers kept saying, everything around us is unstable, and we need to find stability in the instability. And we actually said, let's call the radio station Consortium Instabile, which means the consortium of the unstable. And the farmers really loved that. And so the form that Loda designed was basically all of these parts joined together, that if they're not all joined together, they kind of like flop around, but once they're in place, they're very solid. So this was an open frame that sits in the forest today, and our host brings people here to do interviews and just talk about the future of farming. So we launched the Treehouse with a series of interviews after the horse. We visited a lot of the farmers at their farms, and we partnered with a local radio producer called Radio Papase. And we would offer trade in, if farmers would let us interview them, we would offer the same amount of trade and work. So oftentimes we worked on the farms, and it actually created a kind of different way of engaging with the farmers. We went to flour mills, and we basically focused on farmers growing grains in high altitudes, because these farmers were very old. They considered themselves endangered species. And we wanted to document
Hello, everyone. There is probably a technical problem with Amy. Her screen first froze, and then we lost her. She probably lost connection. Please stay with us. I'm just hoping that this is a small problem. And we're all discussing how to fix this. Hello, everyone. There is probably a technical problem with Amy. Her screen first froze, and then we lost her. She probably lost connection. Please stay with us. I'm just hoping that this is a small problem. And we're all discussing how to fix this. Hello, everyone. There is probably a technical problem.
I don't know what happened. Okay. Is anyone there? Oh, I got kicked off.
Hi,
Amy.
You're back.
Okay.
All right, cool.
I don't know what happened. I got kicked off. Okay, let's see. I can do this again. So, share screen and share screen. Can you see my screen? Oh, maybe I'll just jump. Is anyone there? I don't know if I can. I can't hear. Can you see my screen? I'll just do basic. I guess I just go, hoping there's something there. Okay, we were talking about the treehouse. Could someone just chat me to say that they're there? Or just say something? Is that? Okay. So this radio show was created with the local, with 12 different farmers' stories. And then we were asked by the Maxi in Rome, which is the National Museum of Contemporary Art, to exhibit this project, Consortium Instability. And so what we did is we brought the radio show that we produced to the museum, invited a few of the farmers. Many didn't want to go to the city, but what we wanted to do with this invitation is think about how does the museum function in this project. And for us, often the museum is a way to animate and amplify voices that don't have a space to be amplified. So this was a way to amplify the voices of the farmers through the means of the museum, which in this case, we were able to broadcast through Radio 1, which is the national radio station. So we brought in other farmers, and we also brought in some political, some sort of activists that were connected to agricultural policy in the region. And then we also brought in media theorists because people started to become very interested in this radio station, and also thinking about seeds, the very seeds that these people were talking about, which was the focus of many of the farmers because they were growing uncertified seeds, which was technically illegal in the EU at this time, and thinking about seeds as social media. So some of the conversations at the Maxi were thinking about the knowledge and the information that are held in these seeds and how they're shared over time from hand to hand networks. So that was Radio Instabile at the Maxi. And now I'm going to jump into another project, and I'm going to kind of stream quickly through it so that we can have a good session of questions and answers, or more questions. So this is a project that was in Oslo, Norway from 2010 until 2018. It's called Flatbread Society. And it was a public art project where we were asked to do something in a common area in this waterfront development in Oslo. And for me, this was quite questionable again, like how do you go to another place so far away in time and culture and make something significant? And so we were quite hesitant in the beginning of this and thinking about how do you work in this space. And so like with Victory Gardens, we looked back 100 years to see what this place was. And in this exact area, it was a working port where they built boats, and they had a garden here. This was the King's Garden, where food was grown to feed all of the laborers, and the King's Courts right here on the waterfront. And so we were looking at this space as a very productive space where you could see what was happening. And what was happening when we were there was that everything was kind of becoming invisible. Most of what you saw happening were multinational banks were being erected there. People were living very high up in these proposed skyscrapers, and everything had kind of been imagined for this place. So these are renderings of what the developers were imagining this space looking like. And so we formed a working group called Flatbread Society because in Norway, when we were there, so many different types of people were eating flatbread. It was the national breakfast food, but there are also in a neighboring, in the neighborhood near this site, people are eating flatbread from Iran, Pakistan, India. And we thought maybe flatbread would be an interesting currency to bring different cultures together about what we could do at this site. Flatbread was also interesting because it was used by Norwegians as a way to store their grain. So they called flatbread a storage economy. So they would harvest it, mill it, and bake it, and then store it up in the roof to keep it dry for up to 10 years. So often in the winters, they were so long that they would have to go to their last year's store to have enough food to eat. The invitation was to do something in the commons. So there were 5 common areas allotted in this new development. And in Norway, the commons are very strong. There's a national right to be able to roam your country called allemannsretten, which means the right to roam. So you don't see as many barbed wire fences in Norway. And we really wanted to latch onto that. Even though it's very strong, the locals kind of forget this lucky freedom they have. And I think that's the kind of bonus of being the stranger in a place, is that you kind of see things that people gloss over or kind of forget about and are just a mirror to reanimate that. So we chose, based on our time in Abruzzo, to focus on seeds as a symbol of this commons. And we contacted a farmer named Johans House to see who was growing ancient grains in Oslo. This is an ancient rye that you're seeing that he's standing among, which was found in an old sauna. So this rye was grown in the 1800s by a nomadic group of Finnish, they were called the Forest Finns. They were living in the middle of Norway. And they used to do slash and burn agriculture, and they would store their rye in the roofs of their saunas. And Johan and a few other farmers thought, oh, maybe there's some of this rye left, because the Forest Finns were pushed out of Norway, and this rye was not produced for over 100 years. And so they got permission to take apart the roof of this sauna, and they found 9 seeds of this rye, and they planted it. And from 9 seeds, 7 grew. And this is an amazing rye that if you grow 1 seed, it takes 2 years to fully grow. So the first year it propagates 12 of itself, and then the next year you'll have 12 grains with up to 100 seeds on each head. So it's quite a nice bank account. When we met Johan, he said, we do not need museums to conserve varieties. What we want is to grow them. And so he was speaking specifically about this Fallboard seed bank and seed banks in general, and that yes, they're a great backup system, but that what we really need to be doing is planting them in the ground and adapting them to the changing of the climate, the changing of the soil, the changing of our cultural desires. And this really became a kind of trope for us. And also it resonated with Futurefarmers work, always wanting to kind of push out of the museum and get into the kind of mess of everyday life, while still having a strong connection to the museum as an important partner. So we went to Johans House, which was about 2 hours from Oslo, often to have conversations with him. A lot of farmers don't like the city, and he really felt like he was an important partner. So he would have us to his house and bake for us, and would offer to have meetings there with soil scientists, other farmers, and possible partners. So this was a soil scientist from the university that we were talking about. You know, can you grow something in this harbor? Is it interesting to grow grains in this harbor? I think we hadn't thought of a project yet, but we were just wandering around. We started to commit to this place and this project, so we formed a board. We actually presented this to our commissioner and said, we're now very civilized, we're eating raised bread. And we built a board of kind of people outside of the project that we wanted to stay in touch with. So we knew that this project needed a lot of critical reflection within a waterfront development. So we invited an artist named Amy Balkin, Kobe Matthews, Henrik Lubin, who's a political scientist in Berlin, and Neil Smith, a contemporary of David Harvey. And so all of them were very critical, but also supportive, except Henrik Lubin. He declined being a board member because he thought if he was associated with this, it might contaminate his work. So that was really interesting to think about, like, wow, someone we really expect can't be associated with this project. And we can talk about it later. We decided to go forward. Neil Smith was a real champion, and he said, you have to do this. So we proposed to take a part of the waterfront that wasn't being developed for 20 years and was kind of like off to the side in people's minds, and ask if we could farm there. And we thought maybe if we can just start to have a presence in this place, we can maybe change the logic and the direction of the development. The city thought we were insane. No one wants to farm in Oslo. People just came to Oslo to be city people. It's cold. And we said, can we just try to publish some call for participants? 4,000 people applied. We had 150 boxes. And what happened was this group came, we had a meeting and asked people who are really dedicated to be here for 3 years to commit to being here. We didn't know what we would have beyond that. And then the city started to open up little plots around the city in parks to give the remaining people as many boxes as possible to farm. So they had no idea people were interested in farming. It's very key to say that we had a collaborator or a commissioner, Anna Bayata, here. When you do these long-term projects, it's very important to have a local producer. So Anna Bayata was an amazing collaborator and key to this project. This group self-organized, and it's nothing aesthetically interesting per se, but it was a presence at this site where there was nobody. And what happened is, because 150 people were coming to this site, word got out that there's something different happening here. You can actually go to the waterfront and have a garden. And so we proposed to kind of do a next step, which was to think about building a meeting site and broadening the discussion about this space. So in 2013, we built this mobile bake oven because we thought, if we're going to grow grains here, there's a tradition in Norway called a bakehouse where it's a communal bakehouse where people bake and hang out and talk. And we thought it could be an interesting idea, but we didn't know if it would be interesting. So we made this mobile canoe oven to go to different neighborhoods and bake and ask people if they would be interested in having a bakehouse in the waterfront, and also to ask them about their feelings about this development in general and how art could function there. So this was another collaborator, Marta van Dessel. This is Lotte Vranken and Stein Skiffelers. This is me. This was the main constellation of this project. And Marta had a streaming radio throughout this whole wandering of our canoe, and she embedded her microphone in a baguette to kind of make it a little less intimidating. And then all of these conversations were streamed through our website, and they were very informative in terms of shaping the direction we went. We also proposed to make a temporary bakehouse to see if people would be interested in this idea of a bakehouse on the waterfront. And so this was the first version, which was completely open, no keys, and people could come and help if they wanted. And we were learning as we were going as well. So we wanted to build an oven. So we hired a local bread oven builder to come and build sort of this mothership oven, which you see on the left. So it was basically 3 different ovens brought together in one form. And we were trying to bring different cultures of baking together. So there was a tandoor, a raised bread oven, and then a take, which is a Norwegian flatbread oven. And then between was a heated seat bench that you could sit on. And people came, like immediately once these were there, people came to bake there. This is a group of after school immigrant teens who ended up creating a program of baking there. The university came after a climate conference to have their discussions there. On the right is a group of anti-GMO activists who did an action. There was a moment where the EU was going to completely make uncertified seeds illegal. So they ended their demonstration here. Oops. This is a group on the right who was trying to keep the harbor public. It was called the People's Harbor Group. So people just started to use the space, and kind of a critical mass happened. And we formalized the meeting with the anti-GMO activists to do a planting of ancient grains that we had collected. And we kind of made a media event out of it. And this was a very important moment for the project, where we planted 9 ancient grains and claimed this space as a true commons through the lens of these seeds. Also along our projects, often sculptural props animate the work. So this was a telescope rolling pin that we would carry with us on the canoe. We also had Futurefarmers would visit annually, and so we would make posters. We had a website. So the project was, while it was on site, it was also kind of being propagated through printed matter and the internet, which I think is also an important layer of what we do. This is the year where we did these 9 different test rows of ancient grains to see if they would actually grow there. This place had no soil. And then at the end of this kind of 5-week session of a temporary bakehouse, we ran a form and function workshop with everyone who had come through the temporary bakehouse to imagine together what would this look like if it was a permanent space to grow food and grains and a meeting place. And so we met for one day, people baked their ideas, we literally baked them and placed them on this board, which was a continuum of, would the space be completely open, no gate holders, 24 hours a day, or would it be totally closed? Place your models on this continuum, and then we discussed those ideas. And basically out of this, there was people from the city were there, the Minister of Agriculture and Culture were there, a lot of the different groups that had come through the bakehouse were there. And this kind of solidified with that media that we had gotten, that the city said, let's see what something permanent could look like. Let's start with the idea of permanency. But what we didn't have is we didn't have soil. So instead of bringing in soil, we proposed to write postcards to over 70 farmers and invite them to bring a symbolic amount of soil to this site to establish their presence as peri-urban farmers on this kind of city stage. So in 2015, we did a soil procession. 52 of those farmers responded and came with soil. And we met at the edge of the city, and probably someone in the audience, or 2 people in the audience were there, Joe Riley and Audrey Schneider, among others. We met at the edge of the city, and then we processed the soil through the city to the site. And people were on the subways and their apartments watching this soil traipse through the city. This one on the left is the King's farmer. He brought 9 tons of soil. Some farmers just brought a wheelbarrow. Others brought just jars of soil. But the idea was to bring all of these soils together and mix it into a new culture and name this site as a cultural institution on this day. So this waterfront development was bringing a lot of the cultural institutions to the waterfront. So the National Library was coming to the waterfront, the Munch Museum, the opera. And so we proposed that this should also be a cultural space dedicated to art and agriculture. So we made this giant cloth flatbread and mixed all of the farmers' soil together. And this site was named on this day, Losetter, which is a Norwegian term for a common in the city. And we signed a shared document that had been authored with the groups we'd been working with, a declaration of land use, and invited this new mix of soil to be the witness. And then people could sign this document as a gesture to people desiring this space to be a permanent agricultural commons. So this was in 2015. And in that same year, because of kind of the success of the soil procession, and we sort of had the light of the city, or we were in the face of the city, we proposed to partner with the Norwegian Farmers Union to hire a full-time farmer. So this was actually a strange moment because the Norwegian Farmers Union is very conservative. They usually only are focused on large-scale farms. And we met with them, and the idea was to bring some of our art funding to match the funds with them to create a full-time position. And after some negotiations, the president of the organization said, the word culture is in agriculture. I get it. So they agreed, and we are into the 3rd farmer this year. So farmers are hired for 2 years. And in the 2nd year, a new farmer comes in. So they sort of piggyback and train each other. And yeah, it's the 3rd farmer this year. What started to happen when we had the soil on the field and started to plant the grains, and also a community farm run by the new farmer, one day a farmer came by and said, "You're going to need a plow for this. I'm going to bring my horses." And things just started to happen. A lot of it was not really all thought out ahead of time. Like our commissioner was really into it evolving organically. And I think luck came out of that. This is the resident beekeepers. They showed up here in 2013. They're still there. They're called Oslo Apiary and Aviary. And they really kind of became this artistic beekeeping group that has worked there a lot. They also partnered with a Swedish group making these insect hotels. And so the site became a place where many different interests were playing out there. In the summer of 2016, we decided, we had all of this new soil. We decided to plant these 9 grains again that we had grown in a constellation of the shepherd, which is another sign of the commons. And we did a 10-day festival called Human Scarecrows, where we planted these seeds and then we invited sound artists to scare away the birds every day in some way or to distract them until the seeds grew. And so this was the seeding of the field was done in this kind of participatory action. And then for 7 days, there was a sound festival. This is a picture of the permanent, I'm gonna go jump a little bit ahead, a permanent bakehouse that was built. It was built with local boat builders and fashioned after an 1895 rescue boat that you could often see in the harbor. It was a boat that was designed by Colin Archer. And in the permanent one, we stretched out the mothership to be kind of a more vertical version. And we worked with local boat builders on an island nearby to make each of these pieces of the whole. They're all different curves. So each one had to have a different jig being built, which makes the whole boat look a little bit kind of off kilter. The Bakehouse now is programmed by people who propose things there. You have to become an ambassador to have a key or to have the code, and you have to be trained to use the oven, and then you can host events there. So there's a lot of things happening beyond even my knowledge. This is a picture from above as the space is evolving. So this whole space really is a wandering farm. So it's moving every year to rotate the crops, except for one area over here, which is all heritage fruit trees that we planted. In 2017, our contract was coming to an end. So in 2018, we had to leave. And that's a tricky thing. We could also talk about in questions and answer questions section. We decided to take our first year's harvest of grains. This is one of our collaborating farmers, Anders Naas and Mads Polstrud, who was a local producer we worked with throughout the project. We proposed to take these seeds on a reverse migration back to where they were domesticated, arguably somewhere in the Middle East. And our commissioner said, "Fantastic, let's do it." And we're a little bit like, oh shit, we have to do a seafaring journey now. In that summer, also Joe Riley, Audrey Schneider, who are maybe in the audience, we departed from Oslo, and all the people that we had worked with over the years were invited for this kind of send-off, and people brought provisions for us. And the idea was that we would bring our seeds and take them to farmers along a route to Istanbul, share seeds, gather seeds, share seeds, gather seeds. And we had sort of an idea like the horse, but we wanted to leave this journey open to see where we would be directed by different farmers' invitations. So this was our boat, the Christiania, which was actually the old name of Oslo. So it's kind of beautiful to be leaving Oslo on this old rescue boat, which was, its job was to rescue boats in distress. So it's a very fat and kind of slow, heavy boat. And the Latin root of rescue is to return. And so we kind of liked this idea of this rescue boat and this return of the seeds. So this was the proposed journey that we were trying to get to Istanbul, and we headed off, and we had a crew of I think there were 7 of us in most of the time, with 3 captains. And this is a whole new way of being in the world. on a watch for 4 hours, off watch, sleeping and in the middle of the ocean. And what happened was we would go to different towns and we would either get off the boat and go to a farm and hold a seed ceremony where we would trade seeds and collect seeds, or people would come onto the boat and we'd have a more informal exchange on the boat. This is also a farmer we met in England named Andrew Forbes, who hopped on the boat at the head of the Thames and then gave a talk about the history of grains. As we moved up the Thames, he told us about kind of the history of labor and grains on the Thames. These are some pictures of seed ceremonies we had. One was in the National Library in Wales, and one was in a refurbished watermill in Belgium. So very different locations, but always trying to bring together farmers from the region to share the seeds we had brought from other locations. Every seed that we acquired on this journey, we would log and put into these little vessels to protect them from water. In Belgium, we actually left the watermill and took our boat oven back to where the boat was in Antwerp. So this was another form of movement across canals and waterways. And this was the boat parked in the harbor. And so what we tried to do in every harbor was launch a little super low area radio station. So this was Marta and Peter, who were the ones kind of running the radio station from the boat. And they would put an antenna up on the mast. And then if you were very, very local, you could hear some of these interviews from the farmers from before. We performed ourselves in many different ways and modalities. This is in Spain. So we made it to Santander, Spain with the boat, where we had a seed ceremony in the Botan Foundation Museum. And then we processed with this long rope with a lot of provisions for us to the waterfront, to the boat, where the project carried on land. So at this point, we couldn't afford our boat anymore. And we decided that seeds move in different ways besides the sea, by animals, by feet, by hand. And so at this point, Professor Ignacio Chapela met us, and he took 2 of his students and the grains we had brought so far up into the Picos de Europa to try to find shepherds who used to grow their grains up in the mountains up here, and also expressed again this area of the commons, because the commons was something that ran through both the Oslo project and the Seed Journey project quite heavily. I'm almost finished. So just to say that the Seed Journey was going, but at the same time, museums were inviting Futurefarmers to do projects. And so we would try to have, anytime we were invited to a show, we would show some iteration of Seed Journey to try to have this conversation between the cultural institution and then this kind of real life project that was happening. So this was in the Sharjah Biennale. And this is a version of a seed mask that we made with Joe and Audrey, Joe Snyder and Audrey, Joe Riley and Audrey Snyder. This one we proposed to go through the roof of the museum, and what it functioned as was an antenna that was bringing in remote pictures from the journey through this little TV screen here using SSTV. And then it would host our kind of main seeds on the boom of the mast. So this is just a picture of that. So we were trying to think of these museum shows as kind of buoys in this kind of meta journey that we were taking. And these are some of the images, how they would come into the screen on the seed mast. So this is a technology that basically turns images into sound, and then they're transmitted through sound and then reassembled as images on a screen. So the image is coming in line by line, bit by bit. So while we are away, the project in Oslo has really taken on a life of its own. They almost don't know who Futurefarmers are anymore. But we decided to come back in the last year and do one last program. And we called it décollage, which means in French to take off. When you fly out of Paris, they say it's time for the décollage. And in this year, we curated a sound sound happening to kind of animate the bakehouse in a way it wasn't intended to be used, because we really wanted to leave an essence of, yes, this is a bakehouse, it's in a garden, but how can you keep the strange and wonderful through art? So we were often working with students from the National Academy and different arts organizations to animate once a month this space in a different way. So we turned all the ovens into speakers and amplifiers. Before we did that, we hosted a group of as many different cultural flatbread makers as we could, so we could have flatbread for that event and then for a walk for their own. This was just an image of a woman, Lisa from Belgium, who was animating the grains on this vibrating speaker membrane. The tandoor became a speaker. And then we left one more time, and this was kind of our final departure, where we took all the grains we had gotten from the seed journey on a 5-day walk back to Johans House, who had been the first farmer who kind of opened up this whole project of the grains to us in Oslo. So we worked with some students from the academy to make these kind of strange masks that weren't masks, that we committed to wearing above our heads for 5 days. And we walked basically just trying to find these common cabins every night to sleep in until we got to Johans House. Just some images from that journey. We did meet one farmer along the way that we traded some seeds with from the seed journey. And then Johans House surprised us here on this old Viking boat. He met us a little bit earlier, so we didn't have to walk so far. We carried on our backs all the seeds we'd grown on the site, the seeds from the seed journey, and then some of the flatbreads that were made on that last evening to give to Johans House. So this was Johan and another local farmer that picked us up. And basically we went back to Johans House to return all the seeds and kind of create a closed loop to this story. So there's the table again, this time a lot of new actors. And then we kind of promised from there, he said, we're just beginning, you can't leave. And we said, okay, we'll go further on. So this action was called Further On. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Amy. I think at this point, I'd like to open. We have, of course, some more time for Q&A, so I'd like to open the rest of this for questions. So what are your questions? You can type them in the YouTube channel, and I will be conveying them. But while we're waiting for more questions, Amy, thank you so much. Paul has some questions that he shared with us, so I'm gonna just like redirect that to you. So it's a 3-part question. The view camera was an apparatus that required 2 people working together, and the absurdity of the mock horse sparked questions without determined answers. Can you talk more about the processes and challenges of inviting this interaction? Any moments where there was initial resistance to participation? Do you have advice for our grads whose practices make space for open-ended exploratory workshopping and community collaboration and communication? So this is the second part, and the third part is, what is the afterlife of these projects?
Woo. You need to give another talk. Thank you, Paul. So, so far we've been really lucky with the participation part. And I think why it is that we as future farmers are putting ourselves in almost as vulnerable a position as the participants. And we have no expectations. I think that's a super important part. Like, we're going to do this no matter what, just even it's something we're going to do. We're going to push this horse around, and even that image in the environment is something so wonderful. It's kind of maybe a madness. And I think when people see that that is like a committed action, there's a curiosity that's sparked. With the canoe, it was sort of similar. It's so absurd. Like, what are these two people? I mean, literally, Loda and Stain would row in the fjord and then walk out, and you couldn't even get out. People would be like, what are you doing? Do you need help? Are you supposed to be here? What's going on? And then we start to light a fire, and people are like, what the heck? And then we put it on something to keep it still, and people just start to help because they're like, oh, these people are crazy. They don't know what they're doing. And or there's just kind of this moment, and then you don't even have time to say what you're doing. People just start to interject, and a conversation happens. And I think that there's like a precarity. Also, when we would go in Italy, getting the horse off the truck was quite precarious, and it was loud. We would put the thing down, and people would just kind of come to help and get it off. And I think, it's a strange thing of urgency, maybe. That's not maybe such the greatest way to operate, but I think there's something about that moment where there's a space of questioning that's quite different than if we would have predetermined, like, hey, can we come meet you and sit with you and ask you questions? It's very different. I think the open-ended part is really important. I didn't show the very, very first action we did in Oslo, but it was even more kind of scrappy. We built this little, it was like a little wheelbarrow we made from things we found in the trash. And we just went out one night with a fire in that wheelbarrow and a tea kettle on top. And we just started to talk to people. And I think really in these projects, you just have to be present. And I think these, what we're calling relational objects, really help to engage in a conversation that you wouldn't necessarily have if you just were coaching people face to face. And I think it's also like, and maybe don't seem shy, but a lot of us in Futurefarmers are very shy. And it's something to kind of hide behind. And it's something in between you and others. Yeah, I think that is. And what is the afterlife of these projects? I think I kind of answered it in the Oslo project. That project goes on. It's very strong. It's self-organized except for the farmer. The one farmer is like the pillar of the project, I would say, in many ways. The Treehouse project, it had a very long afterlife until a couple of years ago. And it's kind of, I would say the Treehouse is still there. It's on pause. But it, we started that in 2010 and it went on till 2018, which it wasn't meant to be more than a summer project. Victory Garden still has funding in the city of San Francisco. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. I have so many questions, so I would like to address one myself. And everyone who's listening, watching, please, you can use the YouTube streaming option to share your questions. So my question is, Amy, you've been actually, looking at all these projects. They're fascinating. There's many narratives entangled with each other. And they all, at least to me, maybe some of them are more literally a journey, but to me, they all have this kind of air of a journey embedded in them. So I wanted to come back to your own journey as an artist, looking back to, maybe this is just like a too grand of a question. So, but this is what I've been thinking as, I listened to you talk, going back to 1994 and like, that entire time that you've spent with Futurefarmers in your personal journey. Like, what are some changes in the way you now approach ecology, agriculture, horticulture, growing, and also, using art as a channel, or perhaps you're not even using it as a channel. It's all already in all of these activities. So, what are there any changes in your own, take on this throughout your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think it changes all the time. And I think when I first started with Victoria Gardens, I really thought art Okay, well, before that, I was definitely more of a direct action activist. I was really involved in the anti-war movement during the Gulf War in San Francisco. I was also involved a bit with the city in dealing with housing, and I was really more involved in local politics. And but I didn't have the heart for the long struggle of direct activism. My stepfather was an activist and fought for so many things that never happened. And I was like, I'll be a grumpy, horrible person if I do this. I need to find some other way. And I thought that art could do that. I thought with Victory Gardens, I thought, okay, there's this mix. I didn't show some of the sculptural elements and the things that were shown in the museum, but I thought there's this mix of poetry and a different way of working that can maybe do a different type of, make a different type of change. And I was kind of convinced of that until Oslo. And I think I do not see art as a replacement for direct action in any way. I don't fool myself of that. I think what we do, and I don't even know if I would call it art, but what we do has the potential to make significant changes. Like in Oslo, we did actually, and in San Francisco, we changed policy. We changed the Green Initiative in Oslo on how they're developing their city now. I think so many people were trained there and have taken on different projects, and I see that a lot of significant change happened. But I have a constant battle with like, okay, is art the space I should be working in when I have concerns about, the dire drought in California? Like we just did a project about drought and land use in California, and I'm not convinced that art is the space to deal with that. We worked with students and animated a lot of people's critique and questions and even knowledge about how the land is used and has been developed in California. I think more and more working in universities in a more research-based way feels like a space that I'm interested in. But it always changes, and it's always a conversation in Futurefarmers too. We all have different perspectives on that. And some people are direct action activists, and others are working in more poetic modalities. But I find that the thing Futurefarmers does is kind of bring those narratives together in a way that can speak to many different modalities.
So again, we have some more time for questions. There is one coming from Mingxin. I think we can have some more after that. I'm just going to redirect Mingxin's question to you, Amy. Are there any ongoing installations or exhibits of Futurefarmers right now?
Yeah, there's one in San Jose at San Jose State University. It's the kind of culmination of this residency we just did that was looking at the, I showed you one part of it, but the inquiry was looking, one thing Futurefarmers has many interests, but one thing that we're interested in is sort of this human desire to reach beyond our senses, beyond our sight, beyond our touch, through the tools we create. So this project was about how far we're digging down into the ground to get water for our food, and also how far we're reaching out to the moon to create dwellings for kind of next level human civilization. So this project brought together two soils. One was this Corcoran clay, and one was a lunar soil that we had access to through an old Futurefarmer, Dan Allende. And we were taking the data sets from these soils and using them to create scores, basically sound. And what I'm interested in right now is like, I don't think our spoken or written language is sufficient to deal with the reality that's going on in so many ways. Is there another way we can kind of tap into our sensitivities? And sound has been really interesting to me right now. And so what we tried to do is create a score from this data and then have trained musicians try to express this language. And we worked with them saying, you're not going to have command over this. This score is probably nonsense. Imagine that it is kind of this new language that you're trying to stumble through. And I think it was really great to work with students, both ceramics and marching band, to kind of think about the material that they're used to in a different way, and to come to a common kind of language together through a process. And I think we got somewhere. But there is an exhibition in the gallery there. The process was, or the project's way more process-based than about a formal exhibition, but there is documentation and some sculptural artifacts of these instruments we made from the clay.
So Amy, more questions are coming in. This one is from Shiana, and sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. That's not my strong suit. The question is there ever a sense of loss as these means of exchange and ways of living become increasingly rare? And then continues, also the aspects of communication and exchange are very interesting in these projects as well. I'm curious about the types of compromises you may have made throughout the journeys. I think it's a beautiful question. So I'm also going to type it in the chat, the two parts.
Yeah, if you could type it in the chat. I'm not sure about the first part. Maybe I'll start with the second, and then when I read it. I think compromises. It's a strange word. I never think in terms of compromise. I think when you collaborate, there's already, I still think compromise isn't the perfect word for me, but I think that you're open to your ideas shifting and thinking about what the kind of common or the collective idea is. And I think that's the exciting thing for me about collaborating is like, okay, I might have a seed of an idea, Michael Swain might have a seed of an idea, and we start to put them together and see kind of what becomes a common interest. And I think that the donkey I showed you in the beginning of this is about not compromising, or I think where the compromise might come is from institutions where there are institutional constraints or desires that just seem like they're not going to make what we want to do possible. And I think you can always negotiate through that. I think a main issue we run into is finances. We're a big group of people, and often institutions only have the individual artist fee. And so you negotiate ways of getting funds, like imagining like, okay, you're going to have an opening, it's going to cost this much money. Maybe we don't have an opening like that, and redistribute funds in different ways. So there's always ways to kind of redistribute that part. I think compromises can come in, maybe you don't align with the way the institution wants to write about your work. And so you can negotiate to hire someone that you want to write about your work. Like Joseph Beuys Gallery, the Feldmans once told me that when the Guggenheim asked him to do a show, he asked if he could bring his own curator. I was like, whoa, how would that work if you're like, can we bring our own curator? We don't want to work with you. But I think it's super important as we're getting older as artists to really work with curators that understand your work and make sure that that's determined ahead of time. Like right now, we're finalists in a public art project in Toronto, and we have to make a proposal, and we assembled a team. Jill Riley's one of them, and we invited a curator that we had worked with before, who knows our work. He also knows the context, and it's like, if you have that flexibility to find someone who can really advocate for what you need and what you want based on a deep knowledge of how you work, then you don't have to compromise as much. I don't know if that answered the question.
Thank you so much, Amy. Perhaps the word is more negotiation than compromise. But based on your last, comment regarding this public art project, I'd like to take. There's still more time, by the way, for typing questions in the stream. What are your questions? Now, while we're waiting for that, my personal question to you, and I've actually been, really impressed by how you integrate agriculture and architecture, right? And kind of emphasize this connection between the two, which could be dated back to, I don't know, maybe thousands of years. And I'm wondering if you could, expand on your own views, building bridges between two, because again, your practice is, I wouldn't say, but unconventional in many ways that, it involves so many other aspects. If there's like an expanded definition of interdisciplinary, I guess that's, Amy Franceschini and Futurefarmers. So could you just like elaborate on how you view this connection between architecture and growing things, like growing life and farming? Yeah.
I wish Loda Franken was here, our architect, our resident architect, but I think I think I had my own ideas about it as a younger artist, and then Loda studied human settlements, and I think just that's an interesting title for an architecture program, human settlements rather than architecture, and it's to me really think about how do we live together, and that is a social structure, and it's also a physical structure, and it's a form that is often, the form is often informing the function and vice versa. And I think for me, how architecture has become more and more part of the tool set that we use is that I think the mobile architecture for me is the most interesting to create, or actually the combination was interesting in Oslo, like to have this fixed place where people know something is building. So that's kind of your base station. It's not a finished space, so there's that ecstaticness of, oh, it's in becoming. And then the mobile architecture goes out, and it serves as this like rhizomatics network that's bringing people back to the fixed structure and evolving it together. I think that started with the horse. We didn't think about it that in the moment, but after the project, we realized like it was this architectural space. It created a space when people gathered, but then it moved and it brought people with them, and then it brought it back into this permanent treehouse. And so for me, I think that combination has been really interesting. And then Seed Journey is another space where we commingled as a social group and moved through time and space. But I think in the end, it's kind of thinking about what are new forms of being together and shaping places together, and those two seem really important in our work so far.
Well, the outcomes of your vision are just also, in my humble opinion, architecturally fascinating. So thank you so much. We have a new question, and we still have time, so I'm going to read it fast. It's a little bit of a long question. Following up, this is from Joe. Following up on, hi Joe. Following up on compromises and issues of working in / with institutions. Can you reflect on what it means and takes to sustain a long durational, collaborative or collective practice with others? It's one question, and I'll read the rest, asking this question from the point of view of art schools housed in an academic institution where highly individuated practices are often emphasized and are thought disciplined, etc. And how do you /we reroute and reimagine the constraints of these contacts? A beautiful question from Joe.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. I think there's kind of two questions. I think that working within inside academic institutions is a really tricky one. Also because I went to a state school I wasn't in the same situation of going into debt to study. So in graduate school, I didn't pay to go to school, and I currently teach at a free university because, and it's very fortunate that there's a school in Italy that's free. You get paid to go to school there. If I were back in the US, I think I would want to teach at a state school or a city college. But I think there is, I mean, I think what you're doing, Joe, in these different institutions is you're living and breathing the ecology of what you're inside. So you're working as an artist, but you're also trying to overthrow the structure that's oppressing us as being artists. And I think it's going to be a constant struggle, and it needs persistence. And I think, as I said earlier, I don't have the stomach or I can't do direct action as I did before. I will support it, but I think that that's a long struggle, and it's something that it just needs presence and persistence. And it was such a different scale. It's hard for me to answer that. It's such a different scale. When I was at San Francisco State, our tuition was $100, and they wanted to raise it to $125, and we had walkouts. Nobody went to school for a week, you know, and they didn't change it. They raised it, but what that did is it galvanized a group of people to talk about war and other issues, and we became active in other ways. And so I think that's what it is, a fertile space to always be in conscious conversation with the situation within. In terms of the individualized practice versus the collaborative, it's interesting. In the institution where I work, it was like that until recently. I came in and I'm in an eco-social design program. Designers never go, after they leave school, they never work alone, especially if they're eco-social. And in fact, it was very hard to get students to want to work collaboratively because they think they need to have the credibility of doing an individual thesis to get into a PhD, or to have, it's just such a long canon of that, that we actually started to force people into working groups. They could choose to work collaboratively, but we forced them into thematic working groups based on their interests. So we spend a lot of time in the beginning of the semester just listening to concerns, skills, mapping all of them in the room, having them draw their journey of their thesis project, physically drawing it, and then having these drawings overlap. And then we put them in working groups, and we say, okay, for 3 weeks, you're going to work in this group. If you completely don't feel right there, then we'll recalibrate. But it's interesting how even if they want to collaborate, there is this sort of resistance because there's a tradition of this thesis focus and commitment in a way. How do we reroute and reimagine the constraints of these contexts? I wish you would answer that question, Joe. How do you answer that question? I think I think one thing I learned from a friend, Kobe Matthews, is the rerouting is also about hesitation. It's about, if there's a situation that's presented to you, you don't have to accept it right away, and you should wait and see what that really means before acting, and being open to negotiating to reroute things. I think we often think that the situation we're in is fixed and we can always negotiate. And if we don't take that step to negotiate, then there will never be a difference. And to think wildly and expansively on what that might be, what that rerouting might be.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. We are on time now, and I don't see any other questions. And I know you're on a different time zone, but I also wanted to ask you if there is, or am I missing a question now? I want to ask you if there is a last remark you want to make as part of your talk.
I would just have a moment of silence for our fellow humans in Ukraine.
Mhm.
And I would follow that by if you know anyone in Europe that can support anyone in, has an extra room or home or anything.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's a group of students at my school who are very
Mhm.
connected to communication with people there right now.
Mhm. Well, hopefully this channel helps us amplify our message, Amy. But on behalf of the entire department of participants, it's been a delight to have you. Oh, and to listen to your projects directly from you. Thank you so very much for making this happen. And good luck with your future projects. You've been a beacon for most eco-activists, eco-social artists in the field. So thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all who are there that I can't see. Okay.